Thanks a lot, Niven. I hope I'm audible and clear. Again, thanks a lot for having me for this session again for the third or fourth time. And normally on an AIOS, I would look forward to seeing Sir and Madam and you, but I mean, we have to make do again for another year somehow. So this is the view from my terrace. I was just telling Niven, Jaipur, I have a fort right opposite my hospital, so it looks really pretty in the evenings. Phacoemulsification in long and short eyes is like Niven said, not only difficult for early starters, but also difficult for very experienced surgeons, because a lot of things can go off track, and most surgeries are not dedicatedly designed for operating on these eyes. So I'm going to start with short eyes first, and then move my way into longer eyes later. So there are a few points to consider when you have a short eye. I'm just trying to, So there are very few points to consider. When the eyeball gets short, all the structures tend to get short except probably the lens. And that is what causes one of the problems in crowding. So you have a short axial length, you have a small cornea, you have a shallow anterior chamber, iris is bulged out. The lens is normal or larger in size, but it's definitely not smaller. And these eyes are predisposed to uveal effusions because of a lot of blood flowing through very small space. The more common thing compared to nanophthalmos, which is what we just discussed in this previous slide, this is classical nanophthalmos, where the entire eyeball gets short. But the more commonly seen problem in our clinical scenario is what is known as relative anterior microphthalmos, or RAM, which is what you would most likely experience in your practice as an operating surgeon. Now, what is RAM? RAM is another variation of a small eye where the anterior chamber depth is small, but behind the anterior chamber, or behind the length, the axial length is a normal eye. So it's just a short anterior chamber. That's why relative anterior microphthalmos. So there's very less chances of having any uveal effusions or problems, but these eyes are a little more predisposed to corneal degeneration in terms of guttata and pseudoexfoliation. The other variant that you will get in your clinical practice, not as common, but not as RAM when it comes to cataract, but relatively common in our population, is what is known as the exact opposite, which is a normal anterior chamber with a short axial length, which is a classical hyperopia that you see. These eyes, the only problem that you might face is IOL calculations, because most formulas are not catered to these eyes. But these eyes are not difficult to operate. When it comes to axial length determination, for all eyes, it's very critical, but it becomes even more critical for very long and short eyes, because small errors lead to large refractive problems. So my preferred go-to technique is an optical biometry. Whenever I get an opportunity to lay my hands on a swept source, that would be my preferred one. But if you don't have an optical biometry, I think the least one can do is go ahead and do an immersion biometry over a contact biometry, simply because you're measuring the visual axis of the patient and thereby more appropriate readings. My go-to formula for the last 2-3 years has become Barrett's, because Barrett for me works in all sorts of eyes: myopic, hyperopic, and normal eyes. The other formulas one can look at is Holiday and the Hill RBF formula, which are evolving formulas and give us fairly reliable readings as well. But no matter what eye I operate or what patient, I counsel 100% of these patients for residual refractive errors if they fall plus minus 2 standard deviations outside the normality range, because no matter how good I calculate and how enthusiastic the patient is, there's nothing one can do, because nothing is catered to these eyes to be precise. So this is a short, this is a small anterior chamber, as you can see on a slit lamp, with a dense cataract. And I brought about this case to show how things can go wrong. If you notice, this is the same patient showing a B scan, showing a thick choroidal thickening and the dense choroid. Over there, I would normally give mannitol to patients where I do suspect anything might be going wrong. I tend to use small incisions, and I try to avoid main incisions as much as possible. So my preferred technique, apart from doing a phaco for IA and for IOL implant, I would use bimanual or smaller incisions as much as possible. At all points in time, I would want to avoid an hypotony, because the moment you have an anterior chamber hypotony, the choroid will swell up. Then it may cause an expulsive bleed. And for this, my best viscoelastic in hand is a dispersive viscoelastic, which I'll just show. So this is just to show you, this is an old video from my institute, which I borrowed within larger incision. Notice how difficult it is to even put in the chopper, because there's absolutely no space. With the irrigation bottle height running at 100, there's literally no space. Needless to say, you're going to cause iris chafing in such eyes, because you'll have to, there is no possibility for you to protect these eyes. At least there wasn't at that point in time. So the best thing to do is to use viscoelastics, which are tools now in our hands to prevent damage from happening. My preferred viscoelastic is dispersive, in this case Viscoat. Viscoat is chondroitin sulfate. It's a heavy viscoelastic, heavy molecular weight. And like its word says, dispersive, it will sit like a paperweight and it will pull the iris back towards the posterior pole, and it will prevent it from prolapsing. So you can easily remove your instruments. Once that is done, again, like I said, it's important to understand that you have to deliver the energy right in the middle of the anterior chamber, but because there's no anterior chamber in this and there's no depth, there is bound to be corneal damage. So using viscoelastics again, dispersive, using low energy. And notice how over here, I'm not using phaco to remove the nucleus as much as I'm using manual braking. So I'm basically trying to break down the nucleus physically as much as possible rather than using phaco energy, because manual breakdown of this nuclear fragment will cause less energy, thereby less corneal edema. So was the idea. But this is how the patient looks on the post-operative day, because there was literally no space, and despite all manual maneuvers, the damage had been done. Another case, I'm not going to show you, this is not because Dr. Sujata Madam is taking small pupil management. I'm just going to discuss that this is a extremely hyperopic eye, small anterior chamber and non-dilating pupil. So my first incision that I normally would do in an eye which has absolutely non-dilating, absolutely shallow anterior chamber is a side port incision using an MVR knife and not a main incision, because it gives me a very limited access to insert, like I inserted dispersive viscoelastic. Now, since this is a small eye, I decided to imply small pupil. I decided to put hooks to open up the pupil, because in a small eye, the moment you start doing a phaco, the fluid will find its way behind the iris and it will pull the iris up and cause tenting up of the iris, which is going to start plugging your incisions. So I tend to put hooks to tighten up this iris like a trampoline, and then I go ahead and do my surgery. My preferred technique for pupil dilatation in such eyes is Greisch-Schaeber's hooks. Once I do the 4 hooks, then I do my incision. I'm not going to discuss this any further because it makes no, and then I go ahead and do a surgery like a routine surgery. One couple of small pointers: in a hyperopic eye, one would want to make a larger size rhexis than a normal eye, because these eyes are smaller. So the rhexis, what appears to you to be large, will turn out to be a little small when you put an IOL, you realize. But the most important thing, one of the most important steps is this. When you do a hydrodissection, be very sure that you slightly decompress it and don't overinflate the capsular bag, because it's already very tight. Just to show you, if you hydrate, if you do a hydrodissection, and if you have a small capsular rhexis and you don't decompress or you overinflate, you're going to push the entire lens anteriorly, and this is called a intraoperative capsular blockade, or an IOCB. And an IOCB in a hyperopic eye in a surgery or a small nanophthalmic eye can be absolutely lethal, because the posterior capsule can burst open because of the excessive pressure. So do a very gentle hydro in these eyes. Again, beware of the choroid, and that's why keep the eye inflated at all times and don't yank away your instruments. Be very gentle. Do a viscoelastic exchange before pulling out the instruments. Once the surgery is done, be very careful. Counsel these patients, because a lot of them will have amblyopias because they've never seen in their lives. Now, shifting gears from this to longer eyes. And I'm discussing fluid parameters for longer eyes because that is where the maximum impact of this is done. And by longer eyes, I mean high myopic eyes, staphylomatous eyes, post-RK eyes, or post-vitrectomized eyes. We did a study long back from our group, and we concluded that when you use higher parameters technically means a high bottle height, a high aspiration flow rate, high vacuum, and high energy in a myopic eye or normal eye, compared to lower parameters, you lead to more inflammation, which is visible as more corneal edema, because you have to bring it anteriorly and you're causing so much more chatter, and more anterior segment inflammation. We also measured the intraocular pressures inside the eye. This is again published by our group. And we found that, higher aspiration flow rates and high bottle eye lead to higher IOP. And imagine in a myopic eye, which is already degenerate, and a high myop eye, if you put up the IOPs up to 85 millimeters of mercury, what's happening to the optic nerve and what's happening to the macula when the cells are already pretty degenerate and very, very fragile. So we have to be very, very careful when using myopic eyes. Don't increase the bottle height to abnormal levels, and don't use very high flow rates and very high vacuums if you can avoid it. This is just to show you, this is on an Infinity Vision system where we are using a low flow rate, which is about 20, and a bottle height which does not exceed 60 millimeters of mercury. And notice that this is a graph where we have a transducer in the eye which is measuring the pressures, and look at how tranquil the graph is. Compare it to a high parameter graph. There we put the IOP to 80, we put the bottle height to 120 and increase the flow rate to 40. And notice how this graph jumps up and down, up and down. Every time there is an inflation deflation because of occlusion break, your whole thing goes up and down. And obviously these eyes are going to have problems later on. So this is just a comparative showing a turbulent graph with high parameters versus a stable static graph using low parameters. So how do you do that? You balance the input to the output. This is basics of phaco. So if you input low, you output less. So if you drop your bottle height, appropriately drop your vacuum and your flow rate so that there's an input output balance and the chamber does not surge. And believe me, it will not surge. If you balance it right, it will not surge. But what is also important to understand that is not only the inflammation and all that, but high parameters influence the anterior vitreous phase and directly or indirectly influence the peripheral retina and can lead to breaks in the eyes as well. This is just to show you that we've put, this is a clinical experiment where we filled up the Burgess space with triamcinolone, and I'm just going from foot pedal 0 to foot pedal 1, which is no irrigation to irrigation. So as I do it, the whole thing moves back. Now I'm increasing the bottle height. And notice that when I increase the bottle height and appropriately, obviously increase the flow rate to compensate for it, notice the movement of the vitreous phase. Look at that. It goes all the way up and then it pushes all the way back, all the way. So every time you move up and down, it trampolines. And at some point in time, the anterior vitreous phase broke with an intact posterior capsule, and all this triamcinolone was in the mid-vitreous cavity. Just to suggest that if you use high parameters, you're going to break the barrier, natural barrier of the anterior vitreous phase, and this will lead to all inflammation, particularly in myopic eyes, going back posteriorly, and that leads to cystoid macular edemas, and all the trampolining can lead to retinal detachments in periphery and breaks in the periphery as well. So it's a great idea to monitor IOP throughout the procedure if you have an IOP-based system. If not, keep your bottle height low, and one understands that good chamber stability happens with good bottle height. Just one case to end this with, a myopic eye. To highlight the point, this is a myopic eye where RK has been done. I just wanted to show you that when I'm doing a phaco in this eye, it's a softish pupil. Notice my IOP is 20, which translates to a bottle height of 35. And this not only happens during sculpting, man, my flow rate I've kept to 10. So 10 flow rate is a really slow flow rate. But notice the anterior chamber is completely dead stable. And once I have broken down the nucleus, I'm also doing a fragment removal. This is a Centurion system, but in any machine, you can put up a 40, 50, 60 IOP and a flow rate of 20, and you will not have a chamber flutter if your bottle height and your aspiration flow rate match. And you'll be able to take out this very, very smoothly without causing any fluctuations. The same thing, like I said, for a bimanual IA, my preferred is bimanual when it comes to myopic or hyperopic eyes. But again, my IOP is low, but my flow rate is also low to compensate so that there's no surge, and I'm able to take off the entire cortex quite efficiently. In these eyes are the ones where you're worried for anterior trampolining, but nothing will happen so long as your inflow and outflow match. The posterior capsule will stay at its place and not move. So just to summarize my very last 2 points, keep your parameters low for all eyes, small or big. Please handle your exercising properly. Slightly larger for a hyperopic or an ophthalmic eye, slightly smaller for a myopic eye. And bimanual is my preferred choice of instrumentation when it comes to any eye, but a compromised eye for sure. Thank you.